am Bill Moore, M-O-O-R-E. Thank you. Just before I got down here, you're going to find this amusing. Just before I went to go get cleaned up to come down here, I got a telephone call from Monaco, France. And there's a gentleman there that I've known for a number of years, and so he was calling me and said, do you have time to talk? No, I got to come down to Creighton and talk to the students. He said, he says, I know somebody in your family. And I said, really? He says, who? He says, well, it's my neighbor. Well, who's that? Roger Moore. Like the Roger Moore, James Bond. You guys are too young to remember that James Bond. That was like before you guys were born, James Bond. So, so no, I am no relationship to Roger Moore, and I'm not any relationship. I am not. If you thought you were coming to hear the Bill Moore that writes about UFOs, that's not me either. I'm not going to talk about that part of the future of transportation either. What I'm going to talk about is this. Okay? And that probably is, that's either my nose or it's a funny looking hat, right? Okay. I publish, and I'll put my name up here, an online magazine or website, whatever you want to call it, called EV World. And EV stands for electric vehicles. Now, I have been writing about this for the last 12 years. I've had an opportunity to drive most of the fuel cells and advanced electric cars and all that kind of stuff. But I want to talk about a little bit broader topic than that, because this right here is going to determine what you and I drive when we get out to around here. Now, you're probably asking yourself, what is that? Back in 1956, and this was like probably about the time your parents were being born, right? Okay. There was a geologist by the name of, M. King Hubbard. And M. King Hubbard worked for Shell Oil Company. And it was his job, he was an oil field geologist. And so his job was to find oil and to get more oil out of the ground. So as he was looking at oil fields in the United States, this was before they found Prudhoe Bay in Alaska, but he was looking at the oil fields in the United States, and he noticed a very interesting trend. The amount of production coming out of an oil field followed your classic bell curve, which probably, I'm assuming many of you are sort of familiar with the sort of bell curve, the way things work. Probably since you're here, most of you are like over here on the smart side of the bell curve, and I'm back over here on the dumber side of the bell curve. So he noticed actually this happens with oil fields as well. So he started putting more oil fields together, oil fields in Texas and Oklahoma and California and Louisiana, and he noticed this pattern beginning to duplicate itself. So he started taking, okay, what are all the known oil fields in the United States? What is their production over the last 10, 15 years? And how does that extrapolate and fit into this model? And what he found is that for the United States, he said that the United States oil production will hit this top of this bell curve. Remember, he's saying this in 1956. He said it will hit the top of this bell curve somewhere around 1970 to 1971. And he hit it right on the nose. From 1970 on, we began to produce less and less oil in this country and had to import more and more oil. Now, none of you are old enough to remember when we all had to line up for gasoline. I do. I had to go from a nice large car to a little tiny car. This was when the first Arab oil embargo, yes?
It wasn't one of the smart cars, was it?
Pardon?
It wasn't one of the smart cars, was it?
No, no. Long before smart cars. But that helped precipitate the whole thing about smart cars. So in 1973, we had our first Arab oil embargo, followed by the Iranian oil embargo in around 1978 time frame. And we began in 1973, we were importing 30% of our oil outside of the country. Where do you think we're at right now? How much oil are we importing right now? Anybody know?
90.
Well, that's a little high. 60. But heading towards 70. So we're at 60% of our oil now is coming from outside of this country. We import, I want you to think about this number a minute. We import into this country, we actually use. First of all, let me ask, how many of you got here, how many of you walked here? Okay. How many of you took mass transit to get here? Bus. 2 of you? Okay. 3? Okay. How many of you rode like a bicycle, motorcycle, scooter, or something like that? Okay. How many took a car? How many of you rode alone in that car? I did. Okay. So some of you did a little carpooling, right? How many of you rode together? More than one person in the car. Okay, so you got a little, about 25%, something like that, carpooled. But most of us got here in an automobile powered by what? Gasoline, right? And gasoline comes from where? Oil. Most of it comes from oil. There's some of it coming from shale and some odd kind of, you know, tar sands in Alberta, Canada, and places like that. But most of it comes from various grades of crude oil. Okay, so remember this little curve here, because we're going to talk about that. So we all got here by cars. Now, please excuse this really bad map I'm going to make out for you here now, okay? Okay, the United States and Central and South America, right? I mean, it's really bad, okay? And then we've got over here, we got all these guys in Europe, and we got Africa, and here, and it comes over there, and you got India, and then you got all of this, and sort of like that, and then you got our friends down in Australia down here, right? Okay? Now, where does most of that 60% of the oil that you and I had to use to get here, who's the largest supplier of that? Nope. Our friends up here in Canada. About 3 million barrels a day. We'll do it that way. From Canada. Okay? We produce in this country, in the United States, we produce about 12 million internally. Lower 48 and Sarah Palin's old state up here. Okay? Who's the next biggest supplier, do you think? Somebody? No, not quite yet. The next one here is Mexico. If I can spell it. And that's anywhere from 1 to 1.5 million barrels a day. Now the third largest supplier is, that's it, Saudi Arabia, our friends over here. Okay? Now if you were going to draw a map, oh, and the fourth largest, Venezuela, fifth largest, Nigeria. So I want you to think about that. So we use 20 million to 21 million a day. 8 million is produced in the United States, at least 12 million barrels. Think about that. 12 million barrels a day. We go through 1 million barrels of gasoline in the world per second. Per second. Think about it. I mean, it's just staggering, okay?